I was never one to believe in these apparition stories or anything like that, but what happened that night made me rethink everything. I was driving down I-10, an endless road through the desert, and there was just me and the asphalt around me. It was around 3 a.m., the night was heavy, the silence was broken only by the roar of the engine. I had been on the road for hours without seeing another car. The fog, typical of this stretch, began to appear little by little, taking over the path. Vision became blurry and visibility was reduced to almost nothing. I didn't know if I had become more tired or if the darkness was making me paranoid, but suddenly, something caught my attention. In the middle of that dense fog, I saw a silhouette. At first I thought it was a tree, maybe a post, but I soon realized it was something human. The figure was standing in the middle of the road, motionless, as if waiting for me. What made me uneasy was the fact that it didn't move, even with the strong wind blowing in that part. The fog was so thick that it almost seemed as if the road itself had swallowed the rest of the world. I stood there, with my hand on the steering wheel, thinking about continuing, but the feeling of being watched was taking over me. The figure looked like a man, tall, but the vision was so blurry that I couldn't see details clearly. The distance between us narrowed as I slowed down, but something told me I shouldn't get any closer. Still, curiosity led me to continue, and when I got about 10 meters away from him, I realized that he wasn't just any man. The one before me had a smile, strange, grotesque, and his eyes were completely black. I couldn't see any reflection in them, not even a glow. Just emptiness, a black hole. An icy terror took hold of me at that moment. I couldn't stop the truck immediately, fear paralyzed me. It was as if the air had become thick, every movement felt like an effort. But somehow I managed to pull the handbrake and snap out of the shock. I stuck my head out the window. The fog was so thick that the man's face was still not fully visible, but his eyes, those black eyes and the macabre smile were fixed on me, as if he knew what I was feeling. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it was going to come out of my mouth. I no longer cared if he was crazy, a hallucination or whatever. The only thing I knew was that I didn't want to be there. I was almost shaking in the cabin, not knowing what to do. The figure didn't move, but somehow I felt it was watching me, waiting for something. I had already stopped completely, but I didn't have the courage to get out of the truck. The silence was oppressive, as if time had frozen and the only sound left was the echo of my own fear. I couldn't understand what was happening. For a moment, I thought about starting the truck and just getting out of there, but something told me I shouldn't do that. I needed to see more. I needed to understand what was happening. That's when he made the strangest move. It wasn't an ordinary movement, it seemed more as if he had stretched himself, as if the muscles in his body were distorting. I felt a pain in my chest, as if something was pushing me away from him, a physical sensation, almost palpable. The figure, which had previously been standing still, began to approach slowly, without rushing, but with a hypnotic rhythm. His steps were heavy, but the ground didn't seem to give way beneath his feet. There was no sound, not the sound of his footsteps, not the rustling of his clothes. Just emptiness. I knew I shouldn't get out of the truck, that I should speed up and leave as quickly as possible, but something kept me there, glued to that seat, without the courage to take any action. Fear took over me so intensely that I was almost immobile. I was no longer sure that what I saw was real. The man, or whatever he was, came within a few feet of me. His black eyes didn't blink, there was no emotion, no anger, no malice. Just a deep void, which seemed to absorb all the light around it. It was then that, out of nowhere, the figure stopped. I don't know what happened, but in the blink of an eye, she just disappeared. It wasn't like she walked away or ran away. There wasn't even a trace of movement, the fog didn't move, and I didn't hear a single sound. As if she had never been there. I stared into space, waiting for him to appear again, but nothing happened. The fear became more intense, almost as if the air itself was suffocating me, and all I wanted was to get out of there. I stayed there for a few more minutes, not knowing what to do. The truck was off, and the sound of the engine was gone. The only noise I could hear was my own heart beating wildly. I was still trying to process what had happened, trying to find some rational explanation for it. But there was no way. It didn't make any sense. I looked around, waiting for another car to appear on the road, perhaps someone who had seen what I saw, but the road was still empty, as if nothing had happened. I finally decided to start the truck and continue my journey. The fog was still there, but I no longer had the courage to look outside. I just wanted to get away, get somewhere where things were normal, where I could breathe without feeling that presence in the air. But even so, something told me that this man, or whatever he was, wasn't going to disappear so easily. I was left with the feeling that, somehow, he knew everything about me, as if he had read my mind, or worse, as if he had waited for me there for a specific reason. I knew it wasn't just a hallucination. The miles I spent driving after that were a blur. The fear was so present that I couldn't get the image of it out of my head. Sometimes I would look in the rearview mirror, hoping to see that smile again, those black eyes staring back at me, but it never came. I didn't want to stop, I didn't want to see anything that reminded me of that moment. What scares me most to this day is not what I saw, but what I felt. As if, somehow, it had installed itself inside me, accompanying me, observing me in silence. To this day, I don't know what that man was or what he wanted. I never went down that road again, not even close to it. Sometimes I wonder if he's still there, waiting for someone to pass by, someone who has the courage to stop and look into his black eyes. I know that what I saw wasn't a hallucination, but at the same time, I can't explain it. What happened that night stays with me to this day, and the feeling that he might have been watching has somehow never gone away. I still look around, waiting for something to appear. And, in part, I know I will never be able to forget. I was alone on that remote road once again. Driving through the countryside of some place lost on the map of the United States, one of those long, deserted roads that seem to have no end. It was an ordinary night, the kind of night when tiredness starts to take its toll, and all you think about is getting to the next gas station to have a coffee and moving on. But this night was not ordinary. Something happened that, to this day, I can't explain. And I've seen a lot of things on this road, but nothing like this. I was driving at about 80 kilometers per hour, the lights in the cabin gave me a feeling of safety, but the rest of the world was enveloped in total darkness, as if nothing else existed. The road was empty. Suddenly I started to see the headlights of a truck coming from the opposite direction. It wasn't very common to come across other trucks at that time, so my attention turned to him. At first, it looked like just another truck, but as we got closer, something strange happened. I saw my own reflection in the other truck's rearview mirror. And I'm not talking about something normal, like a passing vision. I saw my face, with the same tired expression, the same clothes, the same posture, everything identical to how I was at that moment. It was like I was looking at myself, but in a mirror. Something inside me jumped, and I was frozen for a second. The image didn't make sense, because the truck was approaching from the opposite direction, but there was my reflection, perfectly clear. And for a moment, it seemed like he was staring back at me. I tried not to pay attention to it, I thought maybe it was tiredness, or a set of lights from the road. But as the truck approached, the reflection was still there, as if it was waiting for me, something like a copy of me that was ready to look back at me. When the truck passed, our distance reduced, but that reflection was still fixed, as if it were exactly in the same place it should be. Then, like a snap, everything disappeared as the truck overtook me, and I stood there, silent, trying to understand what I had just seen. My heart was still racing, trying to rationalize what had happened. How could I have seen my reflection in another truck if I was driving alone? The strangest thing is that, even though I knew the reflection was of me, something inside me told me that it wasn't right. As if, somehow, I was a distorted version of myself. I looked in the rearview mirror, but the truck was already far away, disappearing into the darkness, swallowed by the fog that took over the road. But the feeling of discomfort did not disappear. In fact, it has only increased. I continued driving, slower now, still trying to understand what had happened. The fog was thicker, making everything around even more oppressive. The only sound that could be heard was that of the engine and the wind hitting the truck. I looked at the dashboard, the hour numbers reading 3:30 in the morning. The trip seemed to have lasted an eternity, and the feeling that something was wrong persisted. I tried to convince myself that it was all just a hallucination, a game played by a tired mind, but I knew it wasn't normal. I looked out the window. The path in front of me was now narrower and darker. Each curve seemed tighter, as if the road was slowly swallowing me. It was then that I noticed, deep inside, a light. It was a lighthouse, but not just any lighthouse. It was the headlights of a truck, coming towards me. I didn't know what to do since I was alone on the road and didn't expect to meet anyone else. But at the same time, something inside me told me to keep going, not to stop. When the truck was a few feet away, my mind was in a whirl. I couldn't take away what I saw in the other truck's mirror. The light from the headlights got brighter, and for a moment I thought it was just a coincidence, maybe another truck. But as the figure got closer, I felt dread taking over me. I knew what was coming, I knew something strange was going to happen. And then it happened. The moment the truck passed me, the view in the rearview mirror was the same. The reflection. The same face, the same expression, the same tired eyes staring at me. But what scared me the most was the fact that, this time, the reflection didn't disappear. He stayed there. He kept watching me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The reflection in the rearview mirror was there, as if it were a copy of me, but something was very wrong. He continued to stop, staring at me, and the feeling that I was not alone on the road grew. The truck had already passed, and the figure in the mirror no longer made sense. I tried to speed up, but the road seemed to have stretched endlessly. I was stuck there, as if time had stopped. I looked at the road in front of me, but all I saw was fog, and nothing else. The dashboard light seemed even dimmer, as if it were going out. I could no longer look in the mirror, but every time I looked at the road, the reflection became clearer. It wasn't just the image of me, but something more, as if I were looking at a ghost. I tried to focus on the path, I tried not to think about it, but I couldn't. The reflection was there, and the more I looked at it, the more real it became. I could feel something was watching me, not just from the mirror, but from the road itself, from the darkness that stretched out before me. That's when something even more bizarre happened. The reflection, which until then seemed to be an exact copy of me, began to make slow movements. He moved his eyes, followed my movement. I cringed, feeling like this shouldn't be happening. That reflection shouldn't move. It was as if he was trying to imitate my every step. I didn't know if this was a hallucination or if I was somehow seeing a reflection of something I should never have seen. The feeling of dread only increased. Then, suddenly, the reflection stopped moving. And, as if in a sudden movement, he disappeared, as if he had never been there. I looked back desperately, hoping to see that other truck, but the road was empty. The only thing that remained was the sound of the engine and the fog, which now seemed thicker. The truck I had seen before, with my reflection, had disappeared into the darkness, as if it had never existed. But the fear stayed with me. To this day, I can't understand what happened on that road, nor why my reflection appeared the way it did. And the strangest thing of all is that, whenever I pass that stretch of road, I feel like something is watching me. It was a cold, moonless night when I was driving down one of those isolated country roads. The road was empty, and the sound of the truck's engine was the only thing that broke the silence of that remote part. I was tired, but I knew I still had a good amount of time until the next gas station. The landscape was typical of an interior forgotten by the world, with crooked trees and vast fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was there, in those conditions, that I saw her. She was standing on the side of the road, in a particularly dark section with no sign of any other life. The woman appeared to be trying to hail a ride. At first, it didn't occur to me that anything could be wrong. But something inside me, an instinctive feeling, made me speed up. I didn't know why, but the image of that woman, there alone in the middle of the night, gave me chills. Her gaze wasn't like someone asking for help, but someone watching me with something more, something I couldn't understand at the moment. I walked past her quickly, without paying much attention, but the feeling that I was doing something wrong didn't leave me. What bothered me most was the feeling that when I passed, she didn't move, didn't even turn to look at the truck. She stood there, on the side of the road, as if she knew I wouldn't stop. My hand was sweating on the steering wheel, and the fear began to grow. It was a strange feeling, as if she already knew something about me, something I hadn't yet discovered. Later, after driving for a few hours, I stopped at a small gas station to refuel. While I was there, the gas station attendant started talking to me, and just like that, he commented about the woman on the side of the road. He told me a story, something that sounded more like a local legend, but it made my stomach turn. The woman I saw on that road was known for luring drivers into traps. She was always on the side of an isolated road, hitchhiking, and anyone who stopped to help her was never seen again. She was part of an ancient story, a local horror tale, and worst of all, apparently no one knew who she really was. I was silent for a moment, processing what the gas station attendant had told me. He seemed too serious to be just a joke. Fear spread through my body as he talked about the woman, saying that she was a figure who always appeared in remote places, attracting drivers with her vulnerable appearance. And then disappearing without a trace. When he finished speaking, he looked at me intently, as if he knew exactly what I was feeling. He said, almost in a whisper, "If you saw her, if you had the courage to walk past her, it might be too late." Those words kept echoing in my head as I walked back to the truck, my stomach churning. I got back on the road, but what had happened that night wouldn't leave my mind. The image of the woman on the side of the road wouldn't leave me alone. Every turn I took felt tighter, more muffled by the darkness. Fear accompanied me, and even the sound of the engine didn't seem to alleviate it. Everything around me seemed to have become denser, as if I was being watched by something that knew what I had done. I no longer knew if what I felt was just paranoia or if there was something real in that story. When the night started to get thicker, something made me look around. I was alert, but I didn't want to admit to myself that I was scared. But there, on the side of the road, in almost the same position in which I had seen her, she was again. The woman. His eyes shone in the darkness. I knew it wasn't a coincidence, but my body still wasn't responding the way I wanted it to. A feeling of dread paralyzed me. She didn't move, she didn't even move when my truck approached. It was as if he was waiting for me, as if he knew I would come back. With every meter I walked, the feeling that something was wrong intensified. I knew what that gas station attendant meant. And at that moment, seeing that woman standing there, unchanging, an icy feeling ran down my spine. I accelerated without thinking. The road seemed longer now, as if it had stretched out, and the fog, which had once seemed a distant presence, now seemed to envelop everything, swallow the road, trap me. I looked in the rearview mirror and for a moment I thought I saw the reflection of the woman behind me, but she wasn't there. I didn't know if I was hallucinating or if fear had brought me to a point where I could no longer distinguish the real from the imaginary. I continued driving at high speed, my eyes fixed on the road and tension taking over every cell in my body. The fog was thicker than ever, but the thought that the woman was still behind me tortured me. I looked in the rearview mirror again, and this time, I saw nothing. The road was empty, as it should be, but the feeling that she was still watching me, that she was following me, took my breath away. I knew something was happening, but I couldn't understand it. All I wanted was to get off that road as quickly as possible. Minutes felt like hours until the road finally started to open up. I saw the lights of a distant city on the horizon, and for the first time that night, I took a deep breath. But even so, I knew that what happened on that road was not normal. That woman, the feeling of being watched, the gas station attendant's story, everything seemed connected in a way that didn't make sense, but that terrified me. Something in me said that even when I arrived in the city, I wasn't safe. The feeling that the woman was not just a legend, but a real entity, haunted me. That stretch of road stayed with me, and the following nights were marked by nightmares. I tried to convince myself that it was all just a simple scare, something caused by exhaustion, but with each passing night, I found myself thinking about that woman again. Sometimes I have the impression that I see her, on the side of some road, in some distant place, waiting. And the scariest thing of all is that I never know if it's really there or if my mind is just creating this vision. But the feeling that she is real, that she exists, continues to haunt me. And one of those nights, as I was driving down an empty road, almost without thinking, I looked to the side of the road, and there it was again. The woman, standing in the darkness, looking straight at me. My heart raced, but something in me kept me going. I knew it was no longer a question of being afraid, but of knowing if that legend really was what it seemed to be. The feeling that I already knew her, that she was waiting for me, made me accelerate. I didn't know if I was running to escape or if I was running to know what would come next. But one thing was certain, she would always be there, on the side of the road, waiting for me. It was a dark, silent night when I stopped on the side of the road, tired and needing some rest. It was on a very isolated stretch, one of those deserted roads where the only thing you hear is the wind and the sound of the truck's engine running. The fog covered everything around, and the feeling of being completely alone in that place was overwhelming. Darkness seemed to swallow the road, and I saw nothing but the dim light of the cabin. I was just trying to take a break before moving on. I stayed there for a few minutes, trying to get comfortable, when suddenly, a bright light appeared in my rear-view mirror. I didn't know where it was coming from, and at first I thought it was a car approaching. But to my surprise, when I looked, I saw the silhouette of a police officer, standing next to my truck. He wore a uniform, complete with a flashlight, and his presence seemed strangely calming to me, as if he had been there for a while. There was no sound, no siren, and I don't remember seeing any other vehicle on the road before. The police officer calmly approached and knocked on the window of my cabin. His expression was serious, but it didn't seem aggressive. He looked at me for a moment, and then, in a deep, gravelly voice, warned me about the dangers of that area. "You better be careful around here, friend. This road has a bad history," he said. "A lot of drivers have gone missing around here over the years. It's not a safe place, especially at night." I stayed quiet, listening to his words. Something about his presence made me uncomfortable, but I couldn't put my finger on why. He seemed so normal, but there was something strange, like he didn't belong there. The conversation only lasted a few minutes. He said a few more words about the region, warning me about the risk of driving there at night, and then walked away. I was still processing what he had said when he simply turned and started walking away without another word. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw him disappear into the fog, as if he had disappeared into thin air. I stood there for a while, in shock, trying to understand what had just happened. I couldn't move for a few minutes, until I finally got up the courage and started the truck to continue my journey. As I continued on my way, the weight of that conversation was still on my mind. Something about the cop was off, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly it was. He seemed so real, and yet so out of place. The road was empty again, the only light now was from my truck's headlights, illuminating what seemed to be a dark tunnel of fog. I was starting to wonder if I was starting to get paranoid because of exhaustion. But what really made me uneasy was the fact that he disappeared so suddenly, as if he had never existed. A few hours passed until I decided to stop at another gas station. I needed to have a snack and a strong coffee to stay awake. I was stretching and trying to relax when I talked to the gas station attendant. He asked how I was, and I ended up commenting on the police officer I had encountered earlier, just to give some context about the deserted road I was crossing. It was then that the gas station attendant looked at me strangely, as if I had said something completely out of place. He asked again, more cautiously, "Police officer? Here? There haven't been patrols in this area for years, friend." I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he was too serious. I tried to continue the conversation, thinking he was just uninformed, but the whole thing seemed too strange to ignore. There were no records of patrols in that area, nor of any other police officer working there. The gas station attendant told me that this road was known to be abandoned by the local police, an area forgotten by almost everyone. I felt a lump in my throat upon hearing this, because there was no denying that the police officer I had spoken to seemed, well, real. He wasn't crazy, he wasn't someone in disguise. He had the posture of an officer, his uniform was impeccable. But what made me most afraid was the fact that he disappeared so inexplicably. The feeling of being followed began to grow on me. As if he was still there, somewhere, watching from afar. I couldn't stop thinking about him, or the story the gas station attendant told me. The truth was that something was very wrong, and I knew it. After a while, I asked the gas station attendant if he had ever heard of similar cases, but he just gave me an awkward smile and told me to be careful when leaving, as it was a dangerous road. When I got back to the truck, I looked around, hoping the cop would show up again, but there was nothing. The road was quiet, but my stomach was upset. I knew something had changed there. The road was deserted as before, but now, the silence felt heavier. I couldn't help but look in the rearview mirror, always hoping to see something, maybe the cop, or some sign that he was there. But what scared me most was the fact that I had no way of knowing if what I had experienced was real or if my mind was playing tricks because of fear. The feeling of being watched increased with every kilometer I covered. I no longer knew if the police officer existed or if it was just an illusion, but my body told me that there was something much more sinister in that place. When I finally arrived at a brighter stretch of road, almost outside that isolated area, the feeling of relief was immediate. But not for long. I looked in the rearview mirror, and for a second, I saw the reflection of a car behind me. The light from the headlights reflected in the mirror, and it seemed like the vehicle was following me. But when I looked out the window again, the road was empty. There were no cars, no lights. I was already starting to doubt my own sanity. Maybe it was the pressure of the road, or the tiredness, but the truth is that I could never get that vision of the police officer out of my mind. That night, I never stopped. The road seemed endless, and I just wanted to get out of that area before anything else happened. The feeling that something was still watching me, that the policeman was somewhere waiting, didn't leave me alone. I reached my final destination without stopping, without talking to anyone. For weeks, I tried to find out more about that road and that police officer, but I never found anything. There were no records, there was no story to explain what happened. And the strangest thing is, whenever I get back on the road, whenever I pass through that area, I feel his presence, as if he were still watching me, somewhere in the shadows. To this day, I don't know what happened on that road, nor who that police officer was. But what I do know is that after that night, I never looked at a deserted road the same way again. Sometimes, when I travel through more isolated areas, I feel like the road has eyes. And even though I know I'm alone, I have the feeling that, somewhere, he's still there, waiting. Maybe he's a legend, a story told by drivers, or maybe he's something more. Something that, to this day, no one dares to explain. It was a night like any other, or at least it seemed to be. I was traveling alone on a seemingly endless stretch of road, through an isolated part of the country, somewhere where the silence was absolute. I stopped at a small gas station, far from the big cities, where only a few truck drivers made their stops. The place was empty, except for the gas station attendant who looked as tired as me. The sound of the gas pump was the only thing that broke the silence, and I soon found myself inside the truck, trying to rest before continuing my journey. The post was quiet, far from any other civilization, and the feeling of loneliness in the air was palpable. The station's dim light illuminated the surrounding area, but the darkness seemed to swallow the rest of the world. I leaned back in the chair, trying to relax a little, but the feeling of being watched began to grow. It wasn't anything concrete, just a slight discomfort, a feeling that something wasn't right. The night was too quiet, as if time had stopped. Only the hum of the off engine and the gentle wind were audible. It was then that I heard, for the first time, a sound. Something soft but distinct. Weak beats. It was as if someone was lightly knocking on the truck door, slowly, almost like an invitation. I stood up immediately, my heart beating faster, trying to identify what it could be. I looked out the driver's side window, but didn't see anyone. The road was deserted, and the only thing that could be seen was the light from the gas station reflecting in the shadows. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself that it was just the wind, or some noise from the truck itself. But then the knocks repeated, once again. They came from somewhere near the passenger door. I stood still for a few seconds, not knowing what to do. Something inside me told me not to open the door, but curiosity, and the need to understand what was happening forced me to act. I got up again, but this time, my skin was crawling, and a strange feeling took over me. I looked outside, opened the truck door slowly, and nothing. There was no one. The road was still empty. The feeling of presence in the air increased, as if something was there, but invisible. I quickly closed the door and looked around, trying to understand what was going on. The feeling of being watched only increased. It was no longer just the sound of the thumping, but the air around me felt different, like it was denser, heavier. The solitude of the gas station, which had once been comforting, now felt suffocating. I stood there, still, trying to hear any other sound, but what bothered me most was the absolute silence. Those knocks were still in my head, as if they were reverberating inside me, even after I closed the door. I looked around, but there was no one, no cars, no shadow of movement. Just the illuminated station and the darkness around it. I decided to sit back down, trying to convince myself that I was just tired and that my mind was playing tricks. But I couldn't. The feeling that something wasn't right, that there was an invisible presence, didn't leave me. I kept looking outside, eyes fixed on the deserted road, waiting for something to happen. The gas station attendant was inside the station, but he didn't seem to care about anything around him. I didn't know if he was as bored as I was or if something else was going on that night. But what bothered me most was the fact that the beats seemed to echo inside my head. Then, just like that, the knocking stopped. Silence dominated again, but now it seemed even stranger, more oppressive. I didn't know what to do, but my instinct told me to leave, to get out of there as quickly as possible. The idea of continuing to drive in the dark, on a deserted road, was terrifying, but staying there, alone, didn't seem like a good option either. I took the keys and went to the truck, starting the engine, but the feeling that something was about to happen left me with my nerves on edge. As I prepared to leave, I took one more look out the truck window. And that's when I saw it. In the reflection of the glass, I could make out a shadowy figure moving behind me. I couldn't make out details, but I knew it wasn't the gas station attendant. He was inside the post. The figure seemed to approach me, standing behind me in the reflection. My heart raced, and a wave of dread washed over me. I quickly looked back, but there was no one there. Just emptiness and fog. But the feeling of presence continued. It was no longer a doubt, it was a certainty that I was not alone. I didn't know what to think anymore. The figure in the reflection had disappeared, but the feeling that something was there, watching me, didn't leave me. I didn't want to stay at that gas station anymore. It didn't matter if the road was empty or if the gas station attendant didn't seem to care. Something was wrong, and I felt it deeply. I stepped on the gas and took off quickly, without looking back. The road seemed longer now, and every turn seemed tighter. Fear had me constantly looking in the rearview mirror, hoping to see something, anything that would tell me I was out of danger. But the road remained deserted. The fog was thicker than ever, and I could almost swear the darkness around me was closing in, as if I were being swallowed by it. I looked in the rearview mirror again, and there it was. The figure. Now, she was much closer, as if she were following my truck. I couldn't see it clearly, but the outlines of the figure were clear. I sped up even more, my heart was racing, and the feeling of dread washed over me in a way I had never felt before. I knew I was no longer alone on the road. As I sped up, the figure seemed to continue getting closer, but now, it was as if the fog was swallowing it. There was no longer any way to see if she was really there, or if it was just my mind playing tricks. All I knew was that the presence of something inexplicable was all around me, watching over me. I stopped looking back, my focus was only on the road ahead, but the fear still accompanied me, as if the figure was still there, lurking, waiting for the next opportunity to appear. I didn't know what had happened that night, nor who or what was chasing me. When I finally arrived at my destination, the feeling of relief was almost immediate, but the fear had not yet disappeared. I looked at the post one last time, and everything was quiet. There was no sign of movement, nor of any presence. But something inside me knew that whatever I had experienced there, I was not alone. I would no longer stop at isolated checkpoints, and every time I travel those empty roads, I feel the presence of something lurking, waiting. Something that I know will never disappear.